Are you guys looking to lift your Tacoma on a budget? Right here we have our 3rd gen Tacoma, and we currently have this lifted on our budget Icon lift kit, including front spacers and rear lift blocks. And we actually have some 285/70s currently installed on this, and they fit pretty well. We just had to remove the front mud flaps, and with some minor trimming, you could drive this thing with no issues. So if this is something you're looking to do, let's head into the shop and show you how to install this whole kit. So pretty much the only thing you're going to get in the box is the leveling kit spacers, which are going to be going on top of the front strut assembly. And you got a couple of stickers and a QR code for an install guide. So I'm going to go ahead and get the Tacoma up on the lift, get the front wheels and tires off, and then we can start showing you how to take out the front suspension. All right, so we have the Tacoma up in the air, we got the wheels off, and now we're ready to start unbolting things so that we can get our front strut assembly out. So what we're gonna be doing is loosening the 2 bolts on the inner side of the lower control arm. And then we're gonna be taking the 2 bolts out the bottom that hold the lower ball joint to the knuckle. And then that's going to allow the lower control arm to swing down. Before that is able to swing down, you also have to take out the bolt on the bottom of the strut. But once we have that out and that is out of our way, we just have 3 nuts on the top, and we can pull that whole strut assembly out and we can put on our leveling kit. So we're gonna go ahead and take the bolt out on the bottom of the strut, which is a 19. You might need to put a wrench on the opposite side to hold it. But it did come off. All right, so that's now loose. Our knuckle is now loose from our lower control arm. So now that we have those things loosened, we can loosen the bolts on the backside of the lower control arm. Those are concentric bolts, so what that means is as you turn them left and right, it's going to shift your lower control arm in and out, and that's something that they use when they go to do your alignment. So you want to make sure not to mess with that. There's 2 nuts, one that's actually just going to loosen it and one that's going to adjust it. So we're just going to loosen the one that makes it tight. If you want, you could mark where your concentric bolts are so that when you go to put it back together, you can make sure that they are in the same position. So we're going to go ahead and loosen those up now. So looking on those bolts for your lower control arm, you can see there is lines here on this washer. So what I'm going to do is use a paint marker, and I'm going to put a dab right where the center line is. So then when I go to put these back together, or tighten them up, should I say, I know if I need to adjust it or not to get it back to where it was. But like I said, when they do your alignment, they're going to be adjusting these to do what they need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen those up. These are a 22 millimeter. Hopefully I can just use the air impact on the 1/2 and be able to loosen it without holding it on the other side. In order to get this one loose, we're probably going to have to drop the skid plate so we can get better access to the bolt in here. Because this side is all one piece, where this side was a double nut, we were able to loosen that. This one, the concentric washer with all of the markings on it, and where you're loosening is all one piece. So we're gonna go off of this side instead. So to get that off, we're gonna have 4 12 millimeter bolts. I got 2 here in the front and 2 here on the back. And that should simply just come right off. So you have hooks here on the front, so it's not going to just fall on your head. So we got the 22 on there, 22 wrench on the other side. We don't want to take it completely off, just make it loose so that it can move. So now if I take out this bolt here on the bottom side of our strut, our lower control arm can swing out of our way. Then we can just take the 3 nuts off the top and we can pull this whole assembly out. So for the top nuts, we're going to be using a 14mm wrench. Probably should have lowered this down to make it a little bit easier, but so once we have all of those cracked loose, just hold the strut up to take the pressure off of it hanging down, and you can just take them off with your fingers. This one's a little tight yet. Now we can feed this down through. There we go. All right, so we're gonna go ahead now and put on our leveling kit from Icon. We're gonna be using the factory nuts to attach that to your strut assembly, and then the new nuts that come with it, we're gonna be using to attach this whole assembly back into the Tacoma. So now I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down. Now we're ready to put this back up in there and get these 3 nuts started to hold it in place. It's a little bit of work to do about 10 seconds of work and then put everything back together. All right, so you have to make sure your orientation is right when you put it in there so everything lines up. There we go. See ya. So if I'm guessing, the new nuts that came with it are not the same size as the OEM ones because that's how it always goes. They're probably a 15. Anytime you get new hardware, it's always an odd size. Something you never use. A 13, a 15. So we'll see. Yep, not a 14. So these are a 15. Go ahead and tighten all of these down. All right, so we got the 3 nuts up there tight. Now we can swing our lower control arm back up and get our bolt slipped back in for the bottom of that. There it is. Put your washer back on and your nut. So now I'm going to go ahead and lower this. We're going to take the jack. We're going to jack up on the lower control arm so that we can get the bolt started for the lower ball joint, because now that we put that spacer in there, it's going to hold that lower control arm down farther than before, so you can't just thread the bolts back in. I'm going slow because if I go too fast, I might pick the truck up off the lift. So I got that jacked up as much as I can until I started actually seeing the whole Tacoma lifting. So the rest of the way, I can just push down on the upper control arm so I can get these bolts at least started. That one started. All right, so we got both of those started. Go ahead and get these tightened up. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and tighten the bottom bolt on our strut. So I'm at the point where the only thing I have left to do is tighten the lower control arm bolts. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish the other side first. And then I'm not gonna tighten these until I have the wheels back on and it's on the ground. That's the time when you wanna go and tighten these, and I'll explain more when I get there.
20 minutes later.
We have both sides finished up. We're gonna go ahead and throw the wheels and tires on real quick, and then we're going to put it on the ground. And then we are going to tighten the lower control arm bolts. And the reason we are gonna do it that way is because you wanna preload your suspension before you tighten those bolts, because if you were to tighten them in the position that they are right now, and then you go ahead and you put your wheels and tires on, you let it on the ground, and your suspension becomes preloaded, those bushings are going to twist, and you could potentially rip the rubber over time. So what you want to do is tighten this down when the suspension is at its normal operating level. So then you're not going to be putting any extra stress on those bushings that you don't need to. If anyone's wondering, these are 265/70s, which is the factory tire size, but they're a mud terrain from Geolander, Yokohama's. So they look good on here. I'm gonna go ahead and let it down so we can preload the suspension. Now I'm gonna go under there. I'm gonna make sure that our washers with the dashes on it are lined up where we had it before. And then I can go ahead and tighten down those bolts. All right, so these are way off. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that so that it is back to where it was. Make sure the other side is where it was as well before I go ahead and tighten this up. All right, so we got those lined back up and tightened down. So I just need to put the skid plate on. Then we're gonna take it out and do a quick test drive, get the suspension moving and stuff so we can actually see, one, how it rides, and then let it settle in so we can actually see the real ride height. Hook these back on. Ooh. So right here is what you're gonna get. It's pretty simple. You're gonna have 2 lift blocks, one for either side of the rear of your Tacoma, and then you're gonna get 4 U-bolts. So these are gonna be longer than the U-bolts that are on your Tacoma from factory, and obviously they're longer to accommodate for the extra inch of block that we're gonna be putting in there. As far as tools go, you're gonna need either an impact or a ratchet. We have a 1/2-inch drive ratchet here, a 17mm wrench, and then we have a 22, 19, and a 17mm socket. So let's go ahead, we'll get the Tacoma up on the lift, pull off the rear wheels and tires, and then we can start taking out the OEM U-bolts. All right, so with the wheel off, you can see all of your rear suspension components here. You can see your OEM U-bolts here. Those we're gonna be loosening, we're gonna be taking those out. We're also gonna have to take the bolt out for the bottom of the shock. So there's a 17mm nut and bolt, we have to take those out. The U-bolts are gonna be a 19, so you're gonna have 2 per U-bolt. Take those nuts off and take the U-bolts out. And then we're gonna be putting the lift block right here in between your rear axle and your leaf spring, putting the new U-bolts back in and reattaching your rear shock. Now before we get into this, obviously not everyone has a lift to put their truck on. You can do this with just jack and some jack stands, but you are gonna want to support the rear axle in some way. So whether you're putting a jack under it or something like that, because once you loosen these components, you're gonna have to lower it down so that you can slip in the lift block and then jack it back up so that you can get everything reattached. But you can do this at home in your driveway if you really wanted to. All right, so I have it up in the air. I have one side of the rear axle supported with a trans jack here. I'm gonna go ahead and take the bolt out for the lower shock mount and the 4 nuts for the U-bolts, and then I can lower this down and we can put in our lift block. So we're gonna be using a 19 for the U-bolts and a 17 for the shock bolt. So we got those nuts off. You can go ahead and pull your U-bolts out from the top. So now once I lower down the trans jack, the side of the axle will come down and I'll have room in there between the axle and the leaf spring. I can put my spacer in there. Now before you go ahead and put your lift blocks in there, just make sure it's clean, that there's no like debris in there. If it's like a little rusty, maybe just hit it with a wire brush, clean it up, and we can go ahead and put in our lift blocks. So these are really only going to fit in one way. You can see you have this nipple here on the bottom of your leaf spring, and that is going to go in the hole on the bottom side of your lift block. So go ahead and slip that in there. Make sure it's nice and lined up and straight. Now we can go ahead and jack our axle back up so that is tight against your leaf spring. So as you saw, I just jacked it up and I put pressure on there. It wasn't completely lined up. So I just put a little bit of pressure on there. I took a rubber mallet and I hit the leaf spring a couple times and got everything to seat it in correctly. So now we can go ahead and put our new U-bolts in. You can see on the top here, you have these little fingers. You want to make sure that your U-bolts are sitting inside of those. Then you know they're not going to go anywhere and they're going to be sitting straight. So I'm going to go ahead and slip those over. Now we can go ahead and put on our bottom clamp. There's no wrong way to put this on. Obviously, your axle has to sit in there one way, but you can turn it 180 degrees, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna go ahead and slip that up. Make sure your U-bolts stay where they're supposed to in that channel. And I'm gonna go ahead and get one of those nuts started. So these are gonna be a 22 millimeter versus your OEM ones, which are a 19. I'm gonna go ahead and get all of them started and then equally tighten them up. All right, so we got the U-bolts tightened up. If you guys are curious, the OEM torque specs on those is 90 foot-pounds. So now I'm gonna go ahead and jack up the rear axle. I'm gonna get the shock back into the shock mount and get that bolted back up. Torque specs on the lower shock bolt is 75 foot-pounds. So passenger side is done. I'm gonna go ahead and do everything I just did over on the driver's side, and then we can get the wheels back on it, put it on the ground, and see how it sits. All right, guys, there you have it, the budget Icon lift kit on the 3rd gen Tacoma. When we filmed this install, we had some 265/70s installed, where right now we have the 285/70s. You can fit these, but with a little bit of extra work. If this is a kit that you want to pick up to not only make your Tacoma look a little bit better, but to fit bigger tires, you can head over to yotaexpedition.com or click the link right down in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.